Good morning, I'm Julian Reed and welcome to Today in Parliament.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Janae Noel Ferguson. Welcome to another broadcast. Now, Today in Parliament focuses on present legislation and a look back at past debates.
Yes, Janae, but before we start today's program, we'd just like to remember a member of the ZNS radio production team, Donrelio Russell, who died overnight. We express our condolences to his family and may he rest in peace. Well, when the House last met, parliamentarians debated and passed the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants Amendment Bill and the Education Loan Authority Amendment Bill. Those bills will now go to the Senate, and later on in the broadcast we will look at highlights from that sitting of the House.
Certainly, Julian. But today, parliamentarians are expected to begin debate on the Evidence Amendment Bill and the Law Reform and Revision Amendment Bill 2014. Now, they include some minor amendments to the present legislation.
Yes, well, let's get right into the details of those bills, Janea. The amendments for the Evidence Amendment Bill include changes to sections 21 and 22 and the insertion of a new subsection 2.
Now that insertion, Julian, it describes additional means for evidence submission. This amendment allows for an expert to give evidence by way of a live television link on criminal proceedings under this act.
Yes, in this case, Janae, it would apply to the location, meaning the island on which that witness might be situated.
And Julian, this amendment all came about because it was imperative that consideration be given to persons who are brought to give evidence relative to their expertise, but for some reason, for some circumstance, they may be unable to physically be at that court proceeding wherever that court case is being held.
True. And as the government works to strengthen the legislation, Janea, we can expect to see more of these kinds of amendments, considering that the Swift Justice Initiative is something that the government officials are continuing to work on.
That they are the Jurors Amendment Bill and the Parliamentary Elections Amendment Bill. They were just passed about 2 weeks ago in the House, and I guess we can expect to see more of these amendments taking place to shore up our judicial system. The other amendment that they plan to debate today is the Law Reform and Revision Amendment Bill.
Yes, and the proposed legislation also seeks to remove the restriction on the duration of law reform commissioners' appointments.
And the Law Reform Commissioners, Julian, he assumes responsibility for reform and revision of the law, any law in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The legislation that's drafted and presented to Parliament, that is all taken care of by that commissioner. Now, presently, we have 2 commissioners of law reform, but no incumbents at this time.
Yes, I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that during the debate today, Janea, but we can also expect some other things to take place in the House today. During the last sitting of the House, the Fort Charlotte MP, Dr. Andre Rollins, gave notice that during today's sitting he plans to move for the appointment of a select committee and explain for our viewers and listeners, since we're on radio as well, what he wants that select committee to do.
Well, Julian, that select committee he called for, will be charged to investigate all matters involving the alleged oil leak that's in the Marathon constituency from a service station on Prince Charles Drive. He added that the committee should have the power to send for persons and papers with leave and to sit from place to place. That's within any recent recess of the House. We know this has been an issue that's been in the media for the last 2 weeks or so.
And I'm sure we're going to continue to hear a lot more about that. But we're now going to take a look back at debate on the Education Loan Authority Bill. Right. Minister Jerome Fitzgerald, the Minister of Education, led off debate and said that the loan program needs to be restructured and those who are already receiving grants should get an increase in funding. The amendment that was passed is expected to correct some of the deficiencies the program so that the program can effectively be put into operation again.
That's right, Julian. And just some background on the Education Loan Authority, it actually became in operation in 2000, and for the first 2 years, the Bank of the Bahamas served as the approved lender, offering some $33 million of its own funds. But because of extensions on credit, it quickly surpassed that amount. And this act served to regulate the loan process. The Bank of the Bahamas at that time, though, was also contracted to monitor the student loan portfolio. And they assumed, well, they were to receive payment from the government whenever those loans would have fallen into 90 days in arrears.
Right. Now, the major issue they have had is getting people to repay those loans.
That's right.
So that other Bahamians would be able to benefit from an education as well.
Right.
Now, the education minister said the program has now been revamped to recoup some of those funds. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The program now, Mr. Speaker, and the operation of the program and the funds now will be given teeth to make sustainable arrangements with loan recipients to provide tutorial assistance to students, specifically in subject areas which are critical for job preparation and national development. This is a natural complement to the program that my ministry is seeking to implement to improve the national academic performance, specifically in our planned achievement unit within the high schools, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to facilitate the achievement of this nationally important mandate, it is critical that the overarching authority be re-engineered and that the loan program contain controls and measures to ensure that it is sustainable, as I said. In light of this, the Education Loan Authority Amendment Bill will contain all of the powers for the authority to overhaul the loan scheme. It will have a collection unit as presently constituted and attached to the Scholarship and Education Loan Division, which was approved by Cabinet. It will be able to conclude negotiations with the Bank of Bahamas in order to transfer those funds into the Education Loan Authority, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, we're also looking to work closely with National Insurance because there are a lot of individuals, Mr. Speaker, who we are unable to locate, although we understand, Mr. Speaker, that they are within this jurisdiction. So, Mr. Speaker, this fund was set up and only can work and be sustainable, Mr. Speaker, if those who borrow funds ensure that they make every effort to pay those funds back. And so with the moving and passing of this bill, Mr. Speaker, we are now attempting to do everything possible from a policy perspective, a legislative perspective, to allow and encourage them to do so, and also to give the authority the teeth to pursue those persons, Mr. Speaker, who for one reason or the other refuse to meet their obligations. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that, of course, it has been the view of successive governments to undertake an aggressive investment in tertiary education. By this very scheme, collectively, we have invested $100 million in education at a tertiary level, and it is now critical that we must do what we can and what is necessary to establish protocols and policy and legislation in order that at some day, we hope in the near future, Mr. Speaker, providing that those persons live up to their obligations, Mr. Speaker, that we will be able to restart the education loan scheme for the benefit of future generations.
Well, that was MP for Marathon, Jerome Fitzgerald, giving you an overview of the reasoning for the Education Loan Authority Amendment Bill that was passed in the session of the last meeting of the House of Assembly, but also contributing to debate was Anglerson MP and Minister of Transport and Aviation, Glenys Hannah Martin. Now, she underscored the importance of continuing education for Bahamians, which she says will allow the nation's youth to remain competitive.
Education is critical to personal development and to national development. And the scholarships that we're speaking about is access to tertiary education. We're talking about university, college. And we need to do all we can, Mr. Speaker, to create more and more and more and more and more access for our young people to tertiary education. Not as an end to itself, to say I got a bachelor's or master's or PhD, but as a building block towards building capacity. It is merely the beginning, Mr. Speaker. And when you look at the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, you know, and this is why we have issues. I know more than anybody. I see it, feel it, hear it. I'm on the front line of it. I know we have issues. And it disturbs me and it distresses me greatly. But one thing I know, and I believe, accept unconditionally, despite the disappointments I have numerous times and things that are happening, is that this country has a tremendous amount of gifted people. And I'm trying to figure out now, how come? I mean, why is it that God has been so absolutely overflow in his generosity to our people, Speaker? And I just want to refer to, a couple of things. We look at the Rhodes Scholars. Rhodes Scholars are the creme de la creme in academics. This little country produced 3, not 1, not 2, but 3. Speaker. And I'm told per capita, this is more Rhodes Scholars than any country on the planet. And that says something. I predict and I believe that we are going to produce a Nobel Prize winner in some field or sphere, or maybe more than one, Speaker. And everywhere you look worldwide, Bahamians are at places you say, what? You can't believe it. The other day, we heard about Johnny Kemp in here today, Mr. Speaker. I remember Johnny Kemp when I was a little girl at the PLP conventions, and he was a little boy, because he was small generally, but he was really small then. And we were around the same age. And there he was on the stage performing. It was a sight to see such a young boy perform at the standards that he performed. And he went to New York when he was a teenager, Mr. Speaker, and took it by storm. His famous song is Just God Paid. And it is a song that when I was in university, and I would hear it in the clubs or in the radio in other countries. And when he died, I looked, CNN, all of the top news media were talking about the death of this young Bahamian, Grand Bahamian, Johnny Kemp. And it really sends a message. That in itself, he went there when he was about 18. And he was performing, he was about 15, 14, I don't know. And went out there by storm and just took, just blew the minds of the world. And in fact, I posted something on my Facebook where he says, where he went on Soul Train, and those of us who are old enough remember that, and where the host, what was the name of the host, Soul Train? Don Cornelius. He said, from New York by way of the Bahamas, believe it or not, believe it or not, believe it or not. And I thought that spoke volumes. And and just to elaborate further on this concept of the ability of our people and the importance of tertiary education, Mr. Speaker, we were in Shanghai the other day with the Prime Minister, and there's a Bahamian woman working there who is one of the managers of the international schools. And she made an observation when we met with her, I think Minister Mitchell was there. She said that the Chinese children have nothing on Bahamian children. She said the difference, however, is that in China, there is a greater push through the parental thing. But she's an educator, veteran in the Bahamas and now in China. But she said that she's not come across a child that matches the intellectual potentiality and creative potentiality of a Bahamian child. And this was something that was repeated just the other day by the principal of E.P. Roberts Primary, because I think E.P. Roberts is now the most improved school in the district, primary school. And she used the word to describe those little children. She said they're genius. She didn't say she had one who was a genius or two. She said those children are genius, Speaker. And so I want to conclude in this way, Mr. Speaker, by saying that this regularization of this scholarship initiative to be better able to monitor and to facilitate tertiary education for our children and the linkages the minister spoke about with other institutions is critical.
The Angliston MP, the Honorable Glennis Hannah Martin there. Now, the St. Anne's MP, who previously served on the Education Loan Authority, commended the government for taking steps to ensure that more people are able to benefit from the educational loans. That is Hubert Chipman, of course.
That he is. And he also gave some suggestions on how the government can go after persons with delinquent loans. You'll hear about it in this next clip.
And what it is, the key to getting out of a situation when you are faced with a situation where you don't have any funds for education. I learned something this afternoon. I sit on the bipartisan education committee with the minister, and I learned this afternoon there is over from 1990 to 2010, the percentage has increased tremendously as far as tertiary education is concerned. I think it was back in 1990, it might have been around 15 or 16%. Right now, today, it stands at 27%. And that's a remarkable achievement as far as tertiary education. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that that is still low. We believe we can do better as far as tertiary education. Too many people, and Mr. Speaker, I will give a personal experience. I, too, am not under the same scheme. I had an education. I've heard every possible story in the book as to why I should not pay my loan back. Mr. Speaker, like I said earlier, the fund was designed to be a revolving fund. So when I pay my loan back, little Tommy and little Mary would have had an opportunity to have the same opportunities that I had. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, that didn't happen. But Mr. Speaker,
Well, we now take you to live proceedings of the House of Assembly. Parliamentarians expected to begin debate on the Evidence Amendment Bill. You can also join us again at 1 p.m. for live interviews.
Endurance, the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. In a few days, we shall continue to increase the cloud of witnesses to the Bahamas. And I know we'll want to keep our best foot forward, our language pure, and our conduct representative of this great nation of which we are a part. But I ask that those who attend will also conduct themselves wisely, and let us represent ourselves and the great God whom we serve, who is at the right hand of the Father. That's a little sermonette for another day. At the right hand. At God's right hand. We're happy to be alive this morning. Let us give thanks to our mighty God. Heavenly Father, thank you for another night's rest, for bringing us to the morning's light, and for giving us, Lord, the opportunity of seeing the steps you have allowed us to take 50 years since that Memorial Day. We ask for your grace to sustain your people. Bless especially Mr. Speaker of this honorable House, and those, dear Lord, who shall contribute to today's debate and the communications. Remember the nation's leaders, the Governor General, the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, and all those who are in authority. Bless our efforts this day, and as we look forward to entertaining guests, help us to be mindful that by the way we entertain strangers, we may be entertaining angels. Forgive our sins and strengthen us for today's tasks. Increase our faith and our courage, and give us another good sitting today, we pray. In the name of Jesus, who taught us to pray together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Amen. May we run the race with endurance that is set before us today. God bless you.
Good morning, honorable members. Today is Wednesday, the 29th, day of April, in the year of our Lord 2015. And I'd like to welcome you to a new sitting of this honorable house. We thank the distinguished chaplain for those wonderful and sage remarks. We appreciate that, sir, and we appreciate you in your work. Before we begin, I'm advised that we are debating, by way of second reading and committal, the Evidence Act and the Law Reform and Revision Amendment Bill. Before we do that, we're delighted to have visiting with us once again. The year seems to be going by very quickly, unless you ladies determined to come a couple of times a year, because it seems like just yesterday the Eta Psi Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority was visiting with us before, and we're delighted to have you visit with us once again. Eta Psi Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha, affectionately called AKAs, visiting as a part of the AKA Day at the Capitol, led by distinguished President Alana Major, good last name, embarking upon your 52 years of exceptional service throughout the communities in Nassau, Bahamas. I'm also advised that you've been here for the morning and have spent some time with the women parliamentarians, as you usually do, because your focus is seeking to be more actively engaged in government and enhance the knowledge of public policy, issues pertinent to the Bahamian community as a whole, but I'm certain many issues pertinent to womanhood. We're delighted to have you, and I would certainly like to have a round of applause as a welcome by this honorable house. Now, before we get to the business at hand, just by way of update regarding the present impasse as it relates to the Public Accounts Committee's work and the Urban Renewal Commission's report, the chair is still taking that under advisement, and as soon as possible, the chair will report on findings and our ruling going forward. Thank you for your patience. Now to the business at hand. Introduction and swearing of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Very well, before we member, if you pause for a moment, just resume your seat just for a second. The member for Yamacraw, in the capacity as minister, would like to speak to the visitors in the gallery, and so the chair will pause and allow her this time. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamacraw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for indulging me. I just wanted to, as the minister with responsibility for women's affairs, also as the vice chair of the CWP, in the absence of the chairman, the member for Angliston, to join you in congratulating and welcoming the members of Eta Psi Omega chapter, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, as they came today to once again engage the female parliamentarians in their AKA Day at the Capitol. We had some very fruitful discussions this morning, as usual, and we just want to commend them for the ongoing work that they do with regard to the development of girls and women in this country. Thank you so much, Mr.
Speaker. Thank you, honorable member. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Michael.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to lay on the table a the House, the Bahamas Agricultural Corporation Annual Report 214.
Members, order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Gates.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the National Tripartite Council Act 2015, appointed day notice 2015.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the documents be brought up.
Yeah.
Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes honourable member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Port Authority's prescription of numbers of licensed pilots, Grand Bahama, number 3, 8 Mile Rock Port Area Order 2015, and the Port Authority's pilotage fees, Grand Bahama, number 3, 8 Mile Rock Port Area Order 2015, and the Port Authority's Grand Bahama, number 3, 8 Mile Rock Port Area Order 2015.
Thank you, honourable member. Ordered that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes honourable member for Bain and Grandstown.
Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table a copy of the Nursing Council Commonwealth of the Bahamas financial statements for the year ending 31st December 2013.
Thank you, honourable member. Ordered that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes honourable member for Bain and Grandstown.
Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Nursing Council Commonwealth of the Bahamas annual report for the year 2013.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes honourable member for Bain and Grandstown.
Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Anti-Doping Rules 2015.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communication of laying of documents, honourable member? No. Statements and communication by ministers. Chair recognizes honourable member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to lay on the table of the House the latest information on those who are held at the detention center at Carmichael Road. There are now 133 people in the detention center as of this morning. Of that, the largest number is 57 Haitians, and then 23 Cubans, and a smattering of other nationals, including 6 Venezuelans and 2 nationals of Ecuador. Those last set of individuals, the Venezuelans and Ecuadorians, were detained for working without a work permit on a construction site in the Bahamas. Increasingly, construction sites will be the target of investigations into illegal hires. Last week, 331 people were repatriated to Haiti. The public should be advised that immigration operations continue on a daily basis throughout the country. I wish also to say that the amendments to the Immigration Act, which were passed in the Senate last week, are scheduled to come into force on the 10th of May of this year, and the regulations are expected to come into force the day after that. The public is also asked to note that increasingly, non-nationals are appearing in our courts charged with offenses of moral turpitude. We have received reports of people engaged in crimes of immoral user and also of houses being used for people who seem to be in preparation for smuggling to some other country. We continue intensive investigation into these matters and ask the public to continue the stream of information which we receive. Once again, I say that we are in the business of seeking to interrupt a sophisticated criminal enterprise that is engaged in bringing illegal migrants into this country. I wish also to bring to the attention of the public that a report in the Tribune of Tuesday, the 28th of April, quoted me as saying the following, quote, increasingly the assets of the U.S. government have been used to fight migrant smuggling. This is becoming an ever more complicated area. Right now, for example, we're working on an exchange of tip notes, which will in fact be a memorandum of understanding between the two countries on the sharing of intelligence information coming out of interdiction of migrants on the seas. Mr. Speaker, I spoke yesterday to the reporter concerned and asked that his newspaper correct this statement since it is something that I did not say. They have not done so today. I'm therefore forced to correct the statement myself in this forum. At least I looked in the paper. It appears they have not done so, and I'm so therefore forced to correct this statement myself in this forum. What I said was the following. Increasingly, the assets of the U.S. government have been used to fight migrant smuggling. This is becoming an ever more complicated area. Right now, for example, we're working on the exchange of dip notes, not tip notes, dip notes, which will in fact be a memorandum of understanding between the two countries on the sharing of intelligence information coming out of the interdiction of migrants on the seas. The operative expression is dip note, not tip note. Tip note makes no sense in the context of the statement. Tip normally means trafficking in persons. As I explained to the reporter, DIP is short for diplomatic note. In other words, the Foreign Ministry and the U.S. government proposed to exchange diplomatic notes as the form of agreement on how intelligence should be collected and shared on migrant smuggling. And I hope the newspaper will correct the record appropriately. Finally, there are inquiries about the status of the Consul General to Atlanta, who is home for consultations. Those consultations are to conclude shortly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I rise to give a communication to Parliament on the IAAF World Relays 2015. By now, all Bahamians would be aware that as we speak today, the world's most elite track and field athletes from countries around the globe have packed their bags and have now arrived in this beautiful country, the Bahamas, to participate in the second edition of the IAAF World Relays, held at our Thomas Augustus Robinson National Stadium, which we boast as still being the newest and fastest track on the planet. Mr. Speaker, some teams have already arrived, have already gotten in practice sessions. The first team to arrive was Brazil, and then Portugal. They arrived this weekend past, and all systems are ready and up and running. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to correct a statement seen today that the IAAF World Relays will cause blackouts. The IAAF Relays will cause no blackouts. The Thomas Augustus Robinson Stadium has 4 generators, 20,000 gallons of fuel, and can actually run on its own for 5 days, firstly. Secondly, all of the systems, the IBS, the international broadcasting companies are prepped and ready to go. All the computer systems are prepped and ready to go. 2 weeks ago, we had a test event. We turned on every single pipe, line, monitor, and light bulb in that space. It is not that we don't, that we're not ready, but everything has been tested, and we're beyond ready, sir. We're ready to start. The World Relay event, which is the second edition, has become the hottest sporting ticket, not just in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, but in the world. Our 15,000-seat national stadium will again be packed to capacity, as ticket sales have been very robust. I want to let the public know that we've brought in 2,000 extra seats, the bleacher seats from Junkanoo, and when I was there yesterday, about 1,500 of those were sold. So we brought in some extra bleacher seats. If you really, really want to get in, the bleacher seats will be on the second bend, and they only have a few more left. This will be a capacity crowd. We're asking people to come early. Please be on time. This is a made-for-television event. It'll be broadcast live in about 52 countries around the world. We will be starting on the dot on time. That is 4:45, Saturday and Sunday. We wish to also welcome the participation of the world's most recognizable athlete, Jamaican sprint sensation, Usain Bolt. Mr. Bolt is here not just to have fun, but he said he'd come to prove a point. The last time he was here, he was at the old stadium to run, and this time he will be in our new stadium to run, and we're expecting a tremendous event Saturday and Sunday. Mr. Speaker, the gold tickets in our national stadium are sold out. And this is for the naysayers of last year who said, we'd be spending too much money and time on these kind of things. We probably couldn't handle it. The silver tickets are sold out. The bronze tickets, you have 102 left, almost sold out. Mr. Speaker, this will be probably the most exciting athletic event of this entire year anywhere in the world. 48 countries have eagerly registered their participation in this year's edition. The 2015 IAAF BTC World Relays Bahamas will serve as a qualifier for the 2016 Olympic Games in Brazil. It also serves as an additional incentive to participate for all the teams from around the world, as everyone who makes the finals will be qualified for the World Championships and the Olympics in Brazil. Mr. Speaker, the press coverage for this event is something that, once again, we said last year, we could never afford to pay for. This event is expected to generate millions and millions of viewers from all around the world. Thousands of news articles prior, during, and after the event. More than 150 media representatives are already in Nassau and at the stadium. Additionally, the event will be aired live on the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas, ZNS, for our local viewers. Over the 2-day period, we're expecting almost 40,000 people in and around this arena. We have engaged more than 800 event volunteers and the 70 organizing committee members who, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to say that this year, the organizers of this event, is a 100% made in the Bahamas event. The World Relays is scheduled to be held May 2nd and May 3rd this weekend, 2015. We'll see more than 1,000 athletes from the 48 countries around the world compete in 5 relay disciplines: the 4 by 100 meters, 4 by 200 meters, 4 by 400 meters, the 4 by 800 meters, and the distance medley for both men and women. The Kenyans have sent a 60-member team and wish to reclaim their world record in the medley. The teams will compete for a total incentive purse of $1.4 million in exciting relays over the 2 days. Team Bahamas is ready to make us all proud, and was demonstrated over the past weekend, where both Chris Fireman Brown and Ramon Miller, Shawnee Miller, the whole crew were at the Drake Relays. At the Tom Jones Memorial Track Meet, both ran outstanding races, both in the 400 meters, confirming their readiness to lead us to victory. It is worthy to note that at the Tom Jones meet, Shawnee ran the world leading time. That's the fastest time in the world this year in the 400 meters, which incidentally is the fastest time for a Bahamian woman in the past 20 years. Mr. Speaker, we are fired up and ready to go. I thank you very much. I wish to also, Mr. Speaker, present, let me get this thing very quickly for you. This is a commemorative item. And we wish to present this. I'll put this in the leader of the House Business hands, but this is for the Office of the Prime Minister, as this is a one-of-a-kind poster from our first hosting of this event. This is a great honor for us as a country to have this privilege. There are over 12 other major countries in the world who bid for this event, countries whose GDP is about 1,000 times our size. We negotiated furiously and didn't just get one event, but we managed to get it 3 times. Today, Mr. Speaker, at 2 o'clock, the president of the IAAF, Monsieur Liam Diak, arrives in Nassau. This will be his last term in office as he retires this year. And this is an election year for the IAAF. And so we will also welcome, over the next 48 hours, every single council member of athletics from all around the world in Nassau, the Bahamas. So we wish to hand this to the leader of House Business from our side, who is also an award-winning administrator and a great athlete himself. But I just wish to remind him it's for the Office of the Prime Minister. I'm going to have to get 2.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Ordered that the communication be brought up. Thank you. Ordered that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers. Chair recognize Honourable Member for Bain and Grandstand.
Would it be permissible for me to make a short verbal communication?
Pardon me?
Would it be permissible to make a short verbal communication?
Yes, Honourable Member. That would be
Mr.
fine.
Speaker, I would simply wish to remind members and the general public that tomorrow, Thursday, the 30th of April, we will be commissioning the 4th of the series of vessels which we are acquiring for the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the HMBS, which has been named after the famous man from Exuma, Raleigh Gray. The commissioning will be done in Exuma tomorrow at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and to members of the public, we would wish this event to be very strongly supported by the people of Exuma. He was a Stanley Key man, and tomorrow they will descend upon the Emerald Bay Marina, where the commissioning service will take place. Members of the legislature who are interested in attending can get in touch with the permanent secretary of my ministry, Mr. Carl Smith, who might be able to offer assistance in going to Exuma for the service, for the ceremony, and returning to New Providence later in the evening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Communications by the clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to report delivery to the Honorable the Senate of message number 43 from the House of Assembly.
Thank you, sir. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motion for leave of absence, leave to resign seat and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Chair recognizes Honourable Member for South Central Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, good morning. If it pleases you, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time the following. A bill for an act to make provision in respect of patents and applications and to give effect to certain international conventions on patents and for connected purposes.
Just one at a time. One at a time, Honourable Member.
Sorry.
Just so move one bill. Do we have a second? Very well.
B,
No,
a bill.
No, member.
Sorry.
We passed it, the first reading, and then we'll get to the second bill. Need a copy of the bill. Very well.
I can give you these now. I sign them already.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend provisions in respect to patents, in respect to patents and applications, and to give effect to certain international conventions on patents and for connected purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to make provision in respect of patents and applications and to give effect to certain international conventions on patents and for connected purposes.
Further first reading of bills. Chair recognizes Honourable Member for South Central Eleuthera.
A bill for an act to make new and better provision for the provisions for the protection and registration of trademarks, to give effect to certain international obligations of the Bahamas with respect to trademarks, to repeal the Trademarks Act, Chapter 322, and to provide for connected purposes.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Very well. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to make new and better provisions for the protection and registration of trademarks, to give effect to the certain international obligations of the Bahamas with respect to trademarks, to repeal the Trademarks Act, Chapter 322, and to provide for connected matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to make new and better provisions for the protection and registration of trademarks, to give effect to certain international obligations of the Bahamas with respect to trademarks, to repeal the Trademarks Act, Chapter 322, and to provide for connected matters.
For the first reading of bills, Chair recognizes Honourable Member for South and Central Eleuthera.
A bill for an act to provide for the protection of layout designs
also called topographies of integrated circuits and for related matters.
Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend to provide for the protection of new varieties of plants and for connected purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the protection of new varieties of plants and for connected purposes.
For the first reading of bills. Chair recognizes member for South and Central Eleuthera.
A bill for an act to provide, a bill for an act to amend the Copyright Act.
Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Copyright Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Copyright Act.
For the first reading of bills, just move the motion, honorable member, as opposed to just announcing the bill.
Sorry, I thought I'd,
No,
sorry.
individually remove the motion.
I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for the protection of geographical indications and related matters.
Very well. Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to provide for the protection of geographical indications and related matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the protection of geographical indications and related matters.
For the first reading of bills. Chair recognizes honorable member for South Central Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for the protection of geographical indications and related matters. Sorry, we just did that, sorry. A bill for an act relating to false trade descriptions.
Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act relating to false trade descriptions. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act relating to false trade descriptions.
For the first reading of bills. Chair recognizes honorable member for South and Central Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for the protection of new varieties of plants and for connected purposes.
I think that was already done, honorable member.
No, that was the last one.
Integrated circuits now.
No. That was dealt with thirdly.
No, we haven't done it.
We haven't done that yet?
I gave him a new list.
I signed each one that was given to me to sign. Well, okay, fine.
Do you have it? A copy of
No, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for integrated circuits and related matters.
Do we have a second? The bill being brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for first time. A first time. A bill for an act to provide for the protection of layout designs, also called topographies, of integrated circuits and for related matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read a first time.
a bill for an act to provide for the protection of layout designs, also called topographies of integrated circuits and for related matters. Excuse me?
For the first reading of bills,
No, sir. See there? You read that before I took it off.
Trademark, variety of plants, copyright, geographical indications.
That's the one you haven't done.
member for,
Sorry, Mr.
very,
Please, come here, Mr.
very well. We'll just pause for a moment to sort through some paperwork. David. He has it yet? He has it yet? He has the answer. There it is. So, when the debate starts.
Integrated circuits, right?
Finally, further first reading of bills. Very well. Second reading and committal of bills. Before I recognize the honorable member, just to remind all members that the rule of relevance will apply. Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the honorable member for South and Central Eleuthera.
Good morning again, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move the second reading of the Evidence Amendment Number 3, Bill 2014. I believe that it is the intention of the government to argue of the two bills as one, though I will, at the appropriate time, introduce the second one. But whatever I have to say will be said in relation to the first bill.
Very well.
And that way I hope to better utilize our time.
Very well.
These bills, Mr. Speaker, are very short. And notwithstanding their brevity, they are quite important for what we are attempting to do in the Office of the Attorney General. The Evidence Amendment Number 3 bill deals specifically with enabling the Supreme Court to utilize television link specifically with respect to the evidence of experts. This will facilitate the utilization of the technological enhancements that the government has put in place at the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. You will recall in previous debates I had mentioned, and the Attorney General in the other place had at length spoken to the facilities at the quote-unquote Swift Justice Temporary Courts. This amendment really seeks to take full advantage of what the government has provided in terms of electronic infrastructure in the courts. If one looks at the current Evidence Act at Section 22, you will note that it deals with the admissibility of expert evidence. What we are seeking to do is to add to Section 22 of the existing legislation two subsections. One, well, we're really adding a subsection, but we are renumbering the Section 22 so that it will read 22.1, which will be the existing provision at Section 22, and it will be followed by a new subsection 2. And this provision is in two parts, A and B. So an expert may give evidence by way of a live television link in criminal proceedings under this Act where the court is satisfied that A, the expert witness is on an island or in a place other than the island on which proceedings are being held, or B, the expert witness is on the island within the jurisdiction of the Bahamas and the court deems it just and convenient to do so. So there are two separate circumstances that the two paragraphs relate to. The first relates to circumstances where a person is within the jurisdiction, but the trial is on an island other than the island that they are on, or a place that they are not on. This really helps because if you have a doctor, for instance, who is in Grand Bahama performing surgeries, and he is required to give evidence in a criminal matter, it may be highly inconvenient for him to give his evidence. And when I say inconvenient to the public, because it would mean that the interruption of his professional duties will be interrupted. Lives may be put at risk, and those types of considerations may arise. He may go to, in those circumstances, a designated place where he can give his evidence and testimony via television link. That will save a trip. It will save the government the cost of the airline ticket. If he had to overnight, it would save the cost of hotel accommodation and other related expenses. So it aids the criminal justice system in that it reduces the expense required and it makes available the expert evidence without the attendant interruption with the business of the expert in the location that he's on. The second paragraph deals with an expert who is on the same island that the trial is taking place on. So, for instance, to use the same example of a doctor, a pathologist, for instance, may be needed in a trial. He may be carrying on a number of autopsies. There is a shortage of pathologists in the Bahamas, and his having to wait around at court for long periods of time takes away from the available time that he would have to otherwise perform autopsies or other services attendant to the practice of pathology. That in itself may lead to delayed expert opinions being rendered and add to problems which the court may have. By enabling him to go to a room in the hospital and to give his evidence via television link, we are, in fact, contributing to efficiencies both at the court and at the hospital, because then he is able to quickly deal with his evidence and then get back to the business at hand of pathology. And those are two of the most obvious examples of how the amendments will benefit the criminal justice system. And I don't wish to belabor the point. It is a short bill, and I apprehend that I won't see any objection to it from members opposite. The next bill, the Law Reform and Revision Amendment Bill 2015, is even shorter than the Evidence Amendment Bill. And all that this seeks to do is to remove the time limit for the period that a person may be employed as a law reform commissioner. I was asked by the leader of opposition business before proceedings this morning what we were seeking to do, or what was the rationale for this amendment. And as I explained to him, we have a number of legal draftsmen in the Office of the Attorney General and in the Law Reform Commission itself. These persons are employed and are permanent and pensionable civil servants. As the legislation currently stands, notwithstanding that a person may have been employed for a large number of years as a legal draftsman in the public service, they may be prevented from accepting an offer of becoming the law reform commissioner by the practical consideration that they would lose their position of being permanent and pensionable. And if the contract is only for 5 years, that won't be an attractive offer at all. So by removing the upper time limit, we are enabling the government to hire persons who are already permanent and pensionable. And there are a number of them who would make fairly good law reform commissioners. And this would enable us to fill the 2 vacancies that the statute provides for with a greater facility than we are now able to do. Previously, and up until now, the incumbents of the Office of Law Reform Commissioner have tended to be retired judges. And they would have the benefit of their judicial pensions. But as the private sector is competing for their services as well, it is increasingly difficult to attract retirees to the office. And this amendment merely seeks to facilitate the government in enabling it to have a wider choice of candidates to fill the role of law reform commissioner. That having been said, Mr. Speaker,
I would be in breach of the rule of relevance if I continued. And
Well, seems like it works.
and but I think, Mr. Speaker, that I have been the least offender of the rules. So, having said that, I commend the two bills to the House, and I so move. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Do we have a seconder? Chair recognizes Honourable Member for Mount Moriah.
Boy. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I stand to second, firstly, the Evidence Amendment Bill number 3, 2014. I guess that'll be 2015. And the Law Reform and Revision Amendment Bill 2015. Mr. Speaker, while I will stay on message, I would just like to mention one or two small housekeeping matters. Firstly, I'd like to inform all of my constituents in my community that Mother's Day is fast approaching. I will be around and about during Mother's Day, treating our mothers like mothers should be treated on that day. So I will be around on Mother's Day. And I like to take care of mothers in my constituency because, you know, whether we men like it or not, they are the backbones of many a family. And without them, many of us would be lost. I would also like to recognize the events of the past evening, which I think is pivotal. And it's not a political thing. It is really about Bahamians. And I'm speaking about the Black Tuesday celebrations that were held yesterday. I think it is worthy of mention because those events took place in this very place. That mace that sits on that desk, parts of it were involved in that event that happened, if I'm not mistaken, on Black Tuesday. If I'm not mistaken, that is part of the mace that was thrown from the window out of this house. And I think that the window is that's the northeastern window where that mace was thrown by the then member of this place, Lyndon Oscar Pinlan at the time. It is significant because it triggered events that led to majority rule in this place, in this country, I should say. You know, it's not a political thing because members on both sides would have benefited from that chain chain of events that led up to January 10th, 1967. So, you know, I cannot stand here and not recognize the gravity of what happened on that day and what it represents for virtually all of the members of this place, in particular myself. I'm from humble beginnings. So I recognize that, and I'd like to thank them for their actions, and I hope that most Bahamians understand, especially our young people, understands what happened on that day and appreciate it for what it really is. Mr. Speaker, getting to the matter at hand, again, these two amendments are short but very important. Firstly, the Evidence Amendment number 3 bill. Mr. Speaker, what this does when we really think about it is it enhances swift justice. It enhances swift justice in that instead of a matter being stood down or adjourned, we can have evidence given via television from anywhere in the Bahamas or anywhere that is assigned. So it is important that we make these changes. The law is dynamic, Mr. Speaker, and I believe in other places, we are a bit late in this respect, because in other places they had the ability to give this type of evidence long ago. So we welcome this, and we believe that this is important. It is minute, Mr. Speaker, but it changes the paradigm of the ability to give evidence in this country. And I find that very important for our future. Mr. Speaker, as you know, we are presently weathering a crisis of criminality in our country today. And anything that we can do to enhance the administration of justice, the quick administration of justice, Mr. Speaker, is welcomed in our country today. So I commend the Office of the Attorney General and the drafters of this bill. Mr. Speaker, looking at the Law Reform Revision Amendment Bill 2015, again, this is not a very long amendment, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, again, the law is dynamic. And if we are not able to put the relevant people in place who can look at the law, make recommendations for changing the law or improving certain laws, then our country lags behind other countries. Again, Mr. Speaker, I'm of the opinion that there are many laws, as in particular in our country, that need to be amended or changed, Mr. Speaker. We are still largely operating on that old English system, Mr. Speaker, that does not apply to today's Bahamas. Today's Bahamas is dynamic. We have left the quaint fishing village days behind, Mr. Speaker. What is happening in the Bahamas today shows us that the Bahamas is a thriving metropolis that needs laws that would match what is going on in our country today. And I truly believe that we need to seriously look at our laws and change them accordingly to what we're dealing with here today. Mr. Speaker, there's not much else I can say on this. I second what the mover has put forward, and Mount Moriah approves, supports this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Using the Evidence Amendment Bill as the lead bill, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Evidence Act. As many? Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given the brevity of the proposer and the seconder and the restriction of the rule of relevance, I'm not exactly sure where that puts me. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a contribution as best I can with the limitations in place. Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt that the imperative of expert witnesses and witnesses in general to appear for trial is critical to the efficient and proper functioning of our judicial system and the proper dispensation of justice. Mr. Speaker, this speaks to a larger issue in our country where expert witnesses are either not existent, intimidated, or not properly utilized. Indeed, just recently I read in one of the newspapers where, I think it was today actually, where there was a warrant issued for a witness in a case. And we don't know why that individual would not have shown up, but we know that there is tremendous fear in this country today with respect to being a witness in any kind of serious criminal matter. And so the ability for evidence to be taken through video link or other technology certainly is relevant and will hopefully help in securing evidence from these individuals who may feel otherwise threatened if they were to appear in an open court. But, Mr. Speaker, how many years ago did we hear of the police force establishing a DNA lab, only to have the space allocated never renovated or equipped, and subsequently burnt down? The head of that proposed unit was identified, trained, but never properly utilized or deployed, like so many others who were encouraged to enter the field of forensic science, and upon their return could not find employment in the field, either privately or with the force. Some of whom were forced to seek employment in entirely different fields, like aviation. Such a waste of talent and innovation in crime fighting and availability of local experts. Mr. Speaker, I suggest that it's not too late to refocus the program and to make a true effort to set up our own lab to test and verify crime scene data. The same is true of all our other expertise required. Let's train our people, provide the necessary expertise, and at the same time, create employment for Bahamians and increasing our productive capacity overall. Mr. Speaker, during the last administration, the Minister of National Security came in for tremendous criticism by the side opposite. One of the significant criticisms was that witnesses were often not protected and thus intimidated, or worse, killed, resulting in failed trials. Mr. Speaker, given the number of apparent revenge killings today, I wonder what the critics on that side have to say now. There is a saying, be careful, little mouth, what you say, because karma is something else. Mr. Speaker, what is happening today in our streets is nothing but tragic and unacceptable, and some would say avoidable with acute, progressive, and well thought out professional help. Mr. Speaker, I have often spoken about the fact that to date, the government's program for crime prevention seems to be failing. And with in excess of 45 murders to date in just 4 months, Mr. Speaker. Yet, we have an exercise going on today that is at least considered shameless or at worst something else. What can we do, Mr. Speaker, to help stem this rising culture of violence and revenge of vigilante justice? Nice talk will not work, as has been proven today. And employing reformed criminals with no history of service or a clean life and no formal interpersonal training to mentor young criminals seems foolhardy and risky at best. In fact, if I recall correctly, one of the more prolific and noted ex-offenders was recently before the courts himself, Mr. Speaker. And one has to wonder, who did the background checks on these fellows? And how many more are out there supposedly running reform programs but engaging in something else? Quite interesting times, Mr. Speaker, where bad boys are rewarded with jobs and good guys are left to fend for themselves. What a way to build a society and a country. Under the PLP, crime does seem to pay. Illegal gambling problems, no worry, we will legalize it, despite the solicited voice of the people. Can't bank the proceeds, no worries, we'll use our own bank. Pay your bills with $100,000 in cash with no proof of source, no worries, we write on that. Have a conviction before an island administrator, we'll make a call. Have a gun charge, not only that. Meanwhile, We need to take time to digest a report to fix any environmental problems. And it goes on, Mr. Speaker. So how do we attack this problem? The 10 new courts are a start for sure, and I commend the Minister for Legal Affairs. But are they properly staffed and resourced? Are there stenographers in place and incentivized? Do they have paper and water, Mr. Speaker? What about the prosecutors? Are you properly resourced? What effect would we have on crime and dispute resolution if the communities felt that justice was in fact fair and available to all within their communities? Say, for instance, if each police station had a junior lawyer from the AG's office assigned to oversee interrogations, review files prior to going to court, and to mediate community issues with binding effect. Police prosecutors can be freed to focus on actual police work. Contrary to this government's early effort to reduce bail for alleged offenders, what if we were to make bail even more restrictive, with increasingly taxing levels of collateral required based upon the severity of the alleged crime? Police bail should be removed, making it strictly a court function. What if we increased community policing efforts, integrated into each shift in a police station? No need to assign a group of officers separate and apart. Uniform and equip the officers and make training by application rather than subjective selection as a reward. And incentivize officers through ongoing promotional exercises based upon merit, ability, and productivity, as opposed to every 3 or 4 years and promotions at somebody's seemingly random recommendation. What if, Mr. Speaker, we were to allow the police to actually utilize devolution and allow the commanders the ability to deploy resources independently, being area-centric rather than island-centric? Structure and deploy reserves as you would regular officers, structure and deploy the reserves as you would regular officers, rather than just having them show up when and if you feel like it. Target hot crime areas, but not with saturation, or not just with saturation patrols, but rather mobile stations that are set up and manned in these hot spots 24 hours, Mr. Speaker. Make urban renewal assigned officers conduct foot patrols in those areas on a 24-hour basis, Mr. Speaker. Incorporate active gang intervention strategies and employ professional urban counselors to intervene and bring resolutions to community conflicts. Empower civic outreach groups and identify and invest in organizations that are actually in communities making a difference through a grant process. Mr. Speaker, several of us here have had the opportunity to participate in the 9th annual Falcons Boys Club conference under the themes "Building Boys is Better Than Mending Men" this past weekend. Mr. Speaker, this program was founded by a High Rock boy, Mr. Darren Roll, and has grown significantly both in the number of participants and the impact on the lives of its members. And once again, I want to congratulate Darren and Mr. Weatherburn on their active volunteerism and mentoring of these young boys, many of whom have no other male role models. These are the kind of programs, Mr. Speaker, that we ought to be supporting and funding. As I said on Saturday past, the work that they do is much more important than anything that we do here, as they affect lives directly and positively for the betterment of the young men and our society in general. And again, I say thank you, gentlemen. I submit that this is a much better investment with $9 million, Mr. Speaker, and the potential for return, for reward, is so much more significant and long-lasting. Utilizing a connected and integrated information system for all government agencies. In this day and age, there is no reason why our police cruisers ought not to have instant access to any information about a vehicle or a driver of a vehicle based upon license plate, based upon driver's license numbers. And while I talk about the driver's license, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Transport, it would be helpful that if and when you do modernize the driving license, the new driver's licenses, I understand there's some technology upgrade, that we can include on that driver's license your home address. I think that's a reasonable bit of information that can be easily incorporated on this driver's license and would help a lot as you use that as a form of identification, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we should have a maximum security prison, removing the worst offenders to a separate location. And rehabilitation are imperative, as well as modernizing the existing prison system rather than just pouring a new coat of paint or changing uniforms. Prison officers' pay and terms of service should be upgraded, and a unit tasked specifically with investigating corruption in all law enforcement agencies, created, directed, and placed under the auspices of the Auditor General's Office with oversight from a civil board appointed by bipartisan consensus. These are just some suggestions that I offer as an additional potential crime-fighting initiatives that may help to break this destructive cycle we see today. Mr. Speaker, the comment regarding the law reform bill, I note with interest that it is intended that it would allow for the extended service of commissioners or those who would be appointed as commissioners. And I fully support that, Mr. Speaker. One of the tragedies I believe that we've had in our judicial system is that Supreme Court justices are required to retire, I believe the age is 60, 65. Mr. Speaker, with possible extension to 67. Mr. Speaker, at that age, those justices are just hitting their stride. That is the point where they are completely familiar with the law. And more importantly than that, they are at the stage in their lives where they're not trying to prove anything to anybody. And so it gives them the freedom to be impartial and to render rulings that are based upon the law strictly without any considerations, Mr. Speaker. And I hear the member for Carmichael saying that before they were 67 or 65, they had nothing to contribute or they were impartial. That's not the point. That is not the point. That is a very immature point. The point, Mr. Speaker, is the point is, Mr. Speaker, that the point that I was making is that at that point, they have reached a point in their life where they have no axe to grind with anybody. We're a small country. And whether we like it or not, there are biases that go into everything. And that is not to say that our justices color the dispensation of justice by whatever that bias is. But we are all human. And inherently, our experiences shape the way we think and the decisions that we render. It's the point, Mr. Speaker. So again, when you get there, you'll figure it out, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day,
Member.
Mr. Speaker, anyway, I'm going to leave that alone. Mr. Speaker, firstly, I would like to, just before I take my seat, mention two things, with your leave. One is with respect to Bimini. Mr. Speaker, received a call, somebody from Bimini complaining that there were 14 individuals let go from Bimini Sands as a result of the ending of construction work on that project. But there were apparently 32 foreign nationals who were imported and are working on the Bimini Big Game, doing the same kind of work that these 14 individuals who were let go. And they are concerned that while we talk about the economic problems in this country, while we talk about foreign nationals taking Bahamians' jobs, here we have a small community with 14 workers who have the ability, being displaced, and where opportunities exist, that they are somehow not getting those opportunities. I only speak to that, Mr. Speaker, because again, it speaks to this crime issue. Because when you see things like this, and whether it is a fact or not, those involved see it as an injustice. Those involved see it as them being disenfranchised. And as a result, they become angry, Mr. Speaker. And then, that leads to other things. Whether it is crime or whether it is social issues, it leads to other things. And so I only raise the issue such that I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister for Labor and the Minister for Immigration will, in fact, have a look at that situation just to make sure that it is fair. And I'm not passing a judgment on it, Mr. Speaker, but just that those Bahamians do have an opportunity and a first right, a first opportunity to whatever works that are going on that island, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I also received a communication from the Save the Bays and Save Clifton Coalition.
Stretching it down, member.
This is again talking about crime, Mr. Speaker, where they claim that they feel threatened and intimidated. Mr. Speaker, again, I don't wish to take their issue because again, I don't have first-hand information with respect to it. But I do want to say, Mr. Speaker, that as you observe what is happening in this country and the breakdown in communication and the tolerance for dissenting opinions, Mr. Speaker, again, as a effort or strategy to diffuse the tension that leads to bigger problems, Mr. Speaker, I believe it is imperative for all of us to reinforce to our citizenry that there are going to be those people who disagree with you, that are going to have material differences with you, some that you may think repugnant, offensive, but we must, as a people, be tolerant. We must, as a people, appreciate that we can disagree while still respecting each other. Because again, this is all about trying to manage and mitigate conflict and the potential for significant issues in our country. And so I only raise again the issue as one that is of a national import in my view, because it's not just contained to this particular group, although they are the ones that brought it to my attention. It speaks to conflict resolution throughout this country. And we like to talk about young people and how young people don't have any conflict resolution skills. But, the truth of the matter is that we adults have a bigger issue. And we see it right in here. We have a much larger issue with respect to respecting one another, respecting the opinions and the viewpoints of the other side. And so, again, Mr. Speaker, I only raise it in that we need to be cognizant,
members,
Mr. Speaker, of the messages that we send. And finally, Mr. Speaker, and this one is stretching a little bit, I just want to say to the residents in Arden Forest, in my constituency, that we are aware of the gas station that is being built on East Sunrise Highway, and we are following that, just to make sure that, given all of the national issues that have been raised, that the proper safety measures are being put in place. And the same is true with respect to the ship care industry, where there has been some concern raised with respect to sandblasting and the effects that it's having on the health of the workers. Again, these are all issues that are topical, that are of concern to the residents of Grand Bahama, and I just raised them to let them know that we are, in fact, aware of it, and we are, in fact, following it up closely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? Chair recognizes Honourable Member for Pine Ridge.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would just like, while on my feet, to say to the member, through you, the member for East Grand Bahama, that usually... You can't? I'm sorry. Yeah. To the member for East Grand Bahama, that usually we disagree on many issues, but I think today he did raise some issues as it relates to crime that I feel that are relevant, and I want to let him know that as Minister for Grand Bahama and a representative in Grand Bahama, that I believe that somewhere along the line we can find common ground on certain issues and work together as a team to ensure that we continue to reduce the level of crime in Grand Bahama. And to also join him, we were together, me, the member for East Grand Bahama, Central Grand Bahama, and the Minister for National Security at a very important event on Grand Bahama on Saturday that is related to mentoring young boys, men. And I was pleased how we came together as a unified force to demonstrate to our young people that it is teamwork that usually will bring change. But I was particularly pleased with the Minister of National Security taking time out of his busy schedule to show up to Grand Bahama and to speak life into our young men, while at the same time giving advice to pastors, youth leaders, and fathers. It was a tremendous occasion, and I believe that as a group in this Parliament, working together with teamwork to mentor young men, I really believe that we can accomplish great things through that unified force. I also would like to just speak a little bit, because the member spoke about the environment in Grand Bahama and some of the issues as it relates to the shipyard, some of the issues as it relates to the environment, and to also say to the resident of Grand Bahama that we are working diligently on many of the issues that affect our community, particularly being the industrial capital of the Bahamas. There are some red flags that exist that we are working in conjunction with the Ministry of Environment, the Grand Bahama Port Authority, international organizations, as well as the Ministry for Grand Bahama, to address many of the environmental concerns. But Mr. Speaker, this morning I rise on behalf of the great people of Pine Ridge to support the Evidence Amendment Bill and the Law Reform Revision Bill 2015. I also would like to just let my constituency know that every time that I stand to my feet, I take it very seriously, and I will continue to execute good representation to those who I represent, and I am committed to honestly representing them and to echo their concerns in this honorable place, and I will continue to fight, despite the naysayers, to address the economic concerns that affect them and the great social needs that have impacted them as a result of the global economic crisis. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to just thank the residents of Grand Bahama for the way they turn out in massive numbers to the Junkanoo Carnival kickoff on our island. It was poetry in motion. And there was an article in the paper, I think it was yesterday, that clearly outlined the economic impact to our island. I find it to be very exciting, and I look forward to being involved in more projects of this nature to ensure that our people are able to benefit tremendously from bringing critical mass to our island and for them to have access to economic growth. Mr. Speaker, combating crime and criminality remains a priority for this administration. And as a result today, as I stand to make my contribution to these two important bills that are part of this administration compendium of bills that have been brought to this honorable place for the last 5 months, which are designed to facilitate the reduction of crime and the fear of crime that has accompanied its escalation, especially here in the capital. Every time I stand, I always commend the Royal Bahamas Police Force Northern Division on the excellent work they are doing, and today is no different. I look at the way how they executed the security measures at a massive event like the kickoff of Junkanoo Carnival in Grand Bahama with surgical precision with no incidents. That is to be commended because it shows that our local police force have the expertise, have the ability, and also have the wherewithal to reduce the incidence of crime and to address the needs on the spot and in our communities. Mr. Speaker, in her address to the Senate, the Attorney General stated that there are 4 pillars of the justice system, which includes the citizens, the police, the prosecutioners, and the judiciary, each having a specific role to play in this process, which includes investigation, apprehension, trial, and retribution. Mr. Speaker, while the government must accept its critical leadership role in establishing initiatives to halt and reverse the surge of crime in our country, I must reiterate that the notion that our citizens must also have a no tolerance for criminal activity, and we must all stay strong in our traditions and values which our country has been built on in the past. And as a people, we must be willing to assist our law enforcement agencies to gather information and, yes, take the time out of our busy schedule to serve as jurors. Police and prosecutioners must work diligently to build strong cases, and judges must drive the process and ensure that there is little delay as possible in an accused person having their day in court. Mr. Speaker, to declare war on crime and win requires effective law enforcement, social, educational, and economic development, and the support of young people who are the most vulnerable in our society. We must also work hard to establish new, bold initiatives and strategies that will restore our people's confidence in the justice system. I realize the member for East Grand Bahama spoke a little bit about it, but I agree. We must work together as a team to restore this confidence that is so necessary and prevent vigilante justice. Because some of the backlash that we're seeing with violent crime is directly related to vigilante justice. And it is something that I know the Minister of National Security is working very diligently with in his social programs, and we must support him and other civic organizations to ensure that we reduce the incidence of vigilante justice. Mr. Speaker, just last Saturday, after going to the event with our young man, I happened to attend the funeral of a young man that was stabbed to death in my constituency in the Garden Villas area. What is so interesting about this, Mr. Speaker, is that the victim and the accused is in my constituency. So I remember the week before sitting there with the mother of the victim who was looking for support to bury her son. And a couple hours later, sitting with the grandmother of the accused who was looking for assistance to help him with the court case. This is how complicated these issues are and how intertwined they are in the community. So it's got to be a way. We have to find a way. We must find a solution as members of Parliament to really begin now to work more closely in our constituency, and I can say it for myself, so that we can actually begin to stop these unnecessary killings and prevent them due to very strong programs. Mr. Speaker, I sincerely believe that establishing more programs in high-risk communities known for gang violence will help to keep our young men from joining criminal organizations and, by extension, deter them from a life of crime. Mr. Speaker, this can be seen in many inner-city areas in Grand Bahama, in which well-structured programs like the one we talked about earlier, which is called the Falcon Boys Club, and outreach ministries organization are making significant marks and strides to prevent our young men from getting involved in criminal activities. These innovative programs are bringing forth much fruit in the lives of our young men in our community because they are being taught Christian principles and the values of teamwork and self-worth. You see, what is happening in a lot of our communities, there's lots of broken homes, no mentorship. And through these programs, young men have the ability to come in contact with males, men who they can look up to, men who can guide them, and men who could pour into their lives. I would like to once again thank the Minister of National Security for his commitment to youth development and the growth and development of youth programs in inner city areas. Mr. Speaker, modernization of the criminal justice system is a recurring effort that we are working towards with this administration. The Evidence Amendment Bill 2014, for example, demonstrates this administration's commitment to the use of technology in the courts to assist magistrates, judges, to ensure that cases move swiftly through the court system, by making provisions for medical, forensic, and other experts to give evidence from a secured location via television link. The chance of adjournment would definitely be less, and we can move on with getting these cases through the court system. This would inevitably prevent unnecessary delays in the judiciary and cause individuals to pay for the consequences for their crimes. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, reform of our justice system is also occurring through this administration targeted legislation, the restructuring and the appointment of the Law Reform and Revision Commission, the body which is responsible for the assessment of law of the Bahamas, which is necessary for modernization, and to produce revised additions to the laws with a view to replace these obsolete, archaic, temporary laws, will be lifted with the amendment of this Principal Act. The Law Reform Bill 2015 will allow the Commissioner, who is appointed by the Governor General, to perform these significant tasks with security involved. Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly not a criminologist or an expert in law enforcement, but like many of my colleagues, I see firsthand the devastating effects that crime is having in the community I represent. In the past 2 years, a number of murders have occurred within my constituency, and after speaking with the family members and those of the deceased, I realized that 90% of them are preventable. Therefore, winning the war on crime requires changing the mindsets of the offenders through instilling hope, dignity, self-worth, and providing them with an opportunity to improve their quality of life. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that there is no overnight solution for the vexing problem of crime. However, we must continue as a government on both sides of the political divide to commit ourselves to enacting policies and legislation that will make the justice system more efficient and ensure that those who are involved in crime are brought to justice and receive the punishment and or the rehabilitation for the offenses they committed. Mr. Speaker, I want, before I sit, to once again thank the members of the Royal Bahamas Police Force Northern Division on Grand Bahama. You are doing an excellent job, and you are bringing down the crime statistics on our island. I also plead to the residents of Grand Bahama. It's important for us to partner with law enforcement on our island to ensure that things that we are seeing in our communities are reported. And through reporting these things, we can prevent instances of violent crime. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, Pine Ridge support the amendments to the two bills.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Sea Breeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to this debate on these two bills, the Law Reform and Revision Amendment Bill 2015, and the objects and reasons stated therein. That bill seeks to amend Section 3 of the Law Reform and Revision Act, Chapter 3, to remove the restriction on the appointment of law reform commissioners. And the second bill, which is the Evidence Amendment Number 3, Bill 2014, is being enacted to seek to amend the Evidence Act by making provision for experts to give evidence via television link, whether they are present on any island within the jurisdiction of the Bahamas where the proceedings are being held. It goes further to say that it is imperative that consideration be given to persons who are sought to give evidence relative to their expertise, but who, under some extenuating circumstance, are unable to physically attend court and may give evidence from a confirmed location. Mr. Speaker, I rise, ever mindful of this being a privilege that has been afforded to me by the fine folks of the Seabreeze constituency. And I thank them once again for their faith and their confidence in me. Mr. Speaker, last night, right here in Parliament Square, we celebrated Black Tuesday. The celebration was a tribute to the occasion when Lyndon Pinling, a young, bold, audacious politician, threw the Speaker's mace out of the window of this Parliament. The mace was followed by the time clock. These items were thrown by Milo Butler, the time clock was thrown by Milo Butler, who was another bold, audacious politician. Their actions were the symbol of the sense of anger and frustration which the white oligarchy, who used the Parliament and the existing political process to perpetrate their own particular brand of oppression, victimization, and segregation. The action was a catalyst in the movement towards self-determination and majority rule. And it is probably one of the most momentous and historically significant events which have occurred in this Parliament, bar none. What it also demonstrates, Mr. Speaker, is that we have come a long way in our country, but that as a people we fail to appreciate that what is often played out in these halls, though sometimes ugly, is sometimes necessary if we are to advance our democracy. Mr. Speaker, if we were to watch parliaments around the world, we would see that things sometimes do get heated. But Mr. Speaker, it is important that in doing so, that we always remain respectful, not only towards each other, but towards the chair, particularly towards the chair, and that we never, ever, ever should descend into acts of violence against each other. Mr. Speaker, I wish to lend my voice to my colleagues who were able to articulate from the podium last night their appreciation for the great men and women from across the political divide who struggled and sacrificed for the freedoms we enjoy today. So I congratulate the member for West End and Bimini, the member for Fox Hill, and the member for Angliston, and our Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, who all spoke at last evening's event, for their insightful presentations and for their commitment to ensure that the history of our country is inculcated in our people. Mr. Speaker, this country of ours is counted among the developing countries of the world. The Bahamas has some very peculiar features that create challenges to governance. For instance, Mr. Speaker, we are an archipelago of what we call 700 islands, reefs, and keys, stretching over 100,000 miles of ocean. Mr. Speaker, we also have limited natural resources that are what we call commercially viable. Mr. Speaker, we have evolved to the extent that we live the lifestyle of people in developed countries. And we are huge consumers, but we produce little to nothing. Mr. Speaker, we also have an economy which, when you do the math, we seem pretty prosperous. But if you do dig deeper and you look longer and harder, it becomes apparent that the perceived wealth applies to a very small segment of the population. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it is applicable to a segment of the population that are residents only as compared to citizens. In other words, that per capita income, which we often tout at some $22,000 per year, those figures actually do not tell the true picture of the serious gap, Mr. Speaker, that sometimes is between the haves and the have-nots. Mr. Speaker, finally, we have this incredibly high crime rate for the size of our population, particularly this crime rate that pertains to murder and homicides in our country. In fact, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to crime and murder, we can actually be counted among what we call the developed countries, and that, Mr. Speaker, is not anything to be proud of. Mr. Speaker, being counted among these countries of the developed world for crime is nothing to be proud of, as I said. Equally, it is of extreme significance, the huge amounts of revenue that we have to devote to this issue from our scarce resources. Every year, we devote more resources to buying equipment for our national security forces. Each year, we add more human resources to these forces, trusting that manpower and equipment would be able to break the back of crime. We've added more courts, more judges, more clerical staff, more prosecutors, more and better technology. We've passed legislation after legislation, tightening our laws, closing gaps, and dealing with what we call lacunas in the law. We've provided witness protection. We've decreased the size of the jury. We've allowed for witness statements to be received in evidence where the witness is unavailable to give evidence. We have amended the law for witnesses to give evidence through video link, all with a view, again, Mr. Speaker, as I say, to breaking the back of crime. But, Mr. Speaker, the beat goes on. And here we are today, Mr. Speaker, again with legislation that we believe will help the process and help to solve what we see as one of our biggest problems. The legislation today will increase the court's ability to allow evidence to be presented by expert witnesses by live television link in criminal proceedings and only under certain conditions. So those conditions, Mr. Speaker, as laid out in the bill, are at Section 22 of the Principal Act is amended, and it be renumbered as Section 22(1). And it inserts a new subsection 2, which says that an expert may give evidence by way of live television link in criminal proceedings under this Act, where the court is satisfied that A, the expert witness is on an island or in a place other than the island on which proceedings are being held. And so, Mr. Speaker, it would seem to me that that suggests that the witness, if the case is occurring in Nassau, and the witness is, say, in Mayaguana, that as long as the ability is there for the video link, the court can take evidence by virtue of that video link. Or it says in another place, or a place other than the island, that on which proceedings are being held. And so it would seem, Mr. Speaker, that if the witness is perhaps in a country out of the jurisdiction of the Bahamas, that the video link can also be had. Under Section 2B, the expert witness, it says that the expert may give evidence by way of live television link in criminal proceedings where the court is satisfied that the expert witness is on the island within the jurisdiction of the Bahamas, and the court deems it just and convenient to do so. And so, Mr. Speaker, that widens the capability of the court to actually hear evidence of someone who is actually in the Bahamas, but perhaps the witness is unavailable to actually come to court. And as long as they are able to provide that evidence by way of video link, they will be able to give that evidence. Mr. Speaker, this provision increases the ability of the court to expedite criminal trials to conclusion. It will obviate the need for adjournments when expert witnesses such as the coroner, the pathologist, psychiatrists, and persons who are considered to be experts are unavailable to come to court. The beauty of the provision, Mr. Speaker, is that this procedural benefit is available to both the prosecution and the defense. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that this is fair and just, affording every person who is aggrieved and who is before the courts access to justice as they are constitutionally entitled. Mr. Speaker, the criminal procedure in our land is constantly evolving. It is this government's concerted efforts to modernize and keep pace with innovations in the judicial process that is available and being utilized in developed countries. As criminals become more and more sophisticated in their occupation, we must make every effort to beat them at their game, employing manpower, systems, and technology in the fight against crime. We have an obligation to keep our citizens safe. Bahamians everywhere should know that we have never skirted our responsibility as a government. We've not done so in the past. We will employ our best efforts presently, and we will plan and strategize for the future. Mr. Speaker, if we continue to put God first and to believe in the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, I believe that we are on the right track to making significant inroads in the crime situation in our country. And Mr. Speaker, I too wish to add my sentiments of congratulations and my sentiments of appreciation for the work that is done by the Royal Bahamas Police Force, as well as the Royal Bahamas Defense Force in defending our borders against crime and criminality. So, Mr. Speaker, Seabreeze supports both amendments which are being debated here today. And we shall ever, Mr. Speaker, devote our time and efforts to ensuring that the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, is able to reach its full potential, as is the aim and objective of this PLP government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Long Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. It is always my privilege and honor when I stand in this place to do so on behalf of the wonderful people of Long Island whom I represent and whose voices I listen to so that I can articulate in this place on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, with your leave and with the consideration of the rule of relevance in mind, I just wanted to touch on a few things as it relates to Long Island before I get into the crux of the bills. Mr. Speaker, last week I was absent in the House, as you would note, and I'm very pleased to account for my absence in that we had the distinct pleasure of having the ambassador from China visit Long Island for a 3-day period, and it was a most amazing and enlightening time to have both him and Madam Yang view Long Island and view the culture and heritage of Long Island, also visit the Long Island Museum, which I might add, Mr. Speaker, is technically closed at this time, but I will speak to that at a later date, Mr. Speaker. But the fact that the ambassador came, shared with the people of Long Island, the business community, and the local government officials, and opened doors of opportunity for possible investment and training for the Long Islanders. I commend him and his wife and their attaché for such a wonderful visit. Mr. Speaker, I also want to highlight the fact of the free diving world competition, which is taking place in Long Island at this time at the world famous and the deepest blue hole in the world, the Dean's Blue Hole. It's a 9-day event that's taking place as we speak. And Mr. Speaker, I just implore the government and encourage the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Aviation, to see if in future we cannot use this as a vehicle to drive greater tourism to Long Island. It is a world-class event. No, it is not the IAAF, Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, but it is something that draws a lot of attention in the extreme sporting world, and I think we can exploit and capitalize on this a whole lot more. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I thank you. Mr. Speaker, today we stand here to speak on 2 amendment bills, the Law Reform Amendment Bill and the Evidence Amendment Bill. And as stated by both the mover and the seconder, they are both straightforward, they are both quite short, and we notice the brevity of their contributions to this. Unfortunately, for us, Mr. Speaker, when we think about the Evidence Amendment Bill, we on this side automatically think about the swift justice and the rule of law and the fact that we are still overwhelmed with frightening, overwhelming crime statistics. The first bill extends legislation, of course, passed by the FNM during our last term. Mr. Speaker, it is proposed that just as various alleged criminals are now allowed to offer testimony and to be cross-examined from a remote location, that certain expert witnesses be allowed to do the same. The opposition is happy to support any legislation that will help to facilitate the efficiency and the efficacy of the criminal justice system. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind this honorable House and the general public that in 2011, in his crime address as leader of the opposition, the member for Farm Road said of crime, and I quote, for Centerville, I do apologize, I continue to refer as Farm Road, for Centerville, and I quote, that the tsunami of violence sweeping our nation was never inevitable. He said, and I continue, an important reason for the escalation of crime in the Bahamas is poor governance. He said the FNM was paralyzed, unable to lead on this crucial issue. 3 years later, 3.5 years later, with violent crime out of control and criminals continuing to wreak havoc, what is his excuse now? And who does he blame now? The question must be asked, is poor governance still the reason? And what about this paralysis? And Mr. Speaker, what about the inability to lead? May I suggest the right honorable gentleman take a long, hard look in the mirror today. It would really be quite funny if it were not so serious. Bad governance, paralysis, inability to lead. What an apt description of his own administration and leadership. Perhaps we misunderstood him. Perhaps he meant all of this as a forecast of what his own administration would look like and what would define his leadership. Mr. Speaker, the truth be told is that so many areas of public policy, this government has run out of excuses and it is fast running out of time. There is still a tsunami of violence sweeping our country. The poor governance of the PLP is matched only by an unprecedented level of delusion by the Prime Minister. Long ago, he's lost touch with the daily needs and problems of our Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, I say that because when you look in our public square today and you look at our Senate building, right under the coat of arms, the building has been defaced with carnival signage, Mr. Speaker. The sanctity of the Senate building now, it talks about the carnival. Are we participants in a carnival in these honorable chambers, Mr. Speaker? It seems like we are lost in this masquerade. I quote from George Benson's story. It appears that we're lost in a masquerade of a carnival. This is not the time for fun and frolic and for our buildings, our parliamentary buildings, to be draped in such a carnival thing. Mr. Speaker, we've had Junkanoo for years and years from time immemorial. And I thought the carnival was here to bring new infusion of people to our country. But as you drive around New Providence and throughout the Bahamas, it appears that we're just promoting it to our Bahamian people, which is not going to bring much more money. Whether
Point of order.
I think the
Chair recognizes member for West Grand Bahama and
the
Bimini.
member for Long Island is
Members.
member for Long Island is misinterpreting and creating public awareness at home with an event that's taking place with marketing and the fact that the government is promoting abroad on radio stations in the United States and elsewhere, Mr. Speaker, on the highways of the United States, billboards all over the world. We are promoting the Carnival, Bahamas Carnival. Here in the Bahamas, obviously in places such as the central places of the country, you have the awareness, and you are promoting, you're causing a greater awareness of the event taking place. So we are promoting, Mr. Speaker, and we will certainly see a large number of people come into the country. People have begun to arrive now, Mr. Speaker, for not only the IAAF, but they've begun to arrive also for Carnival.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Members, the member for Long Island, I just wanted to caution you because I don't want this debate to get into a carnival debate. You made the point with respect to,
Mr.
I'm not sure exactly where you're heading with
the
it.
place where laws are
But-
made, Mr. Speaker.
But
The point I'm making.
are you going to listen to me? Are you going to listen to me? It caused the member for West Grand Bahama to respond. The debate can easily be taken off center and sideline because of extraneous comments. So I'm just cautioning you. You've made your point. Continue to not belabor the point about carnival. That's the only point I'm
Mr.
making.
Speaker, I take very seriously the sanctity of these hallowed chambers where we come to make laws and where we come to uphold the laws. Mr. Speaker, I do not want it to be considered that this is a place of carnival. And that is the point that I am making.
You've made the
and
point.
you, Mr. Speaker,
You've made
I
the
think
point.
should understand the
I
larger
do.
point.
I do.
You know?
Members,
So there is
members.
still a tsunami- There is still, Mr. Speaker, a tsunami of violence sweeping this country. And so the poor governance of this PLP is matched only
Members.
by the level of delusion we are seeing in this government. You know, Mr. Speaker, as this government falters from crisis to crisis and scandal after scandal, it is paralyzed and unable effectively to lead on crime, on the economy, on energy reform, on mortgage relief, on investing more in education, and on issue after issue, not to mention discipline in its own cabinet. Mr. Speaker, small things make a big difference in fighting crime. So do the big things. But on so many of the big things, this government sadly continues to fail. The PLP said in its Charter of Governance that it would reintroduce the Urban Renewal Program in its true and full form. Urban renewal was touted as one of the main measures in the PLP's arsenal to combat crime. Now, we are beginning to understand what they meant, its true and full form. We are witnessing the same high levels of violent crime, and criminals are still terrorizing our urban areas. Now, there are questions of financial accountability at urban renewal. Instead of respecting the Auditor General in the performance of his constitutional duties,
Member, don't go
they're
there.
trying to
The
discredit
chair's
and
not going to allow
undermine
that.
him.
The chair's not going to allow that. That is off, and that is stricken from the record.
Mr. Speaker,
No comments regarding
what
that.
kind
at
of
this time.
message does this send, Mr. Speaker?
The chair spoke on that earlier in my communication, and the
think-
chair will deal with it. The chair has
Well,
not made a
Mr.
ruling.
Speaker, I think it's a very poor message. In its 2012 charter, the PLP stated, the recent spate of armed robberies and the continuous and I'm quoting, the recent spate of armed robberies and the continuous serious assaults against visitors to the Bahamas is totally unacceptable. The blatant daytime armed robbery of visitors at tourist attraction sites is an obvious example, end quote. If you listened to the PLP at the time, it was the F&M's practices and policies which were responsible for those unfortunate incidents. But when tourists and other visitors are assaulted on their watch, the blame for such assault is laid elsewhere. They promised to reintroduce an initiative which they claim would, I quote, result in an immediate reduction in crimes against visitors. Well, we know what actually happened. Mr. Speaker, once again, in his 2011 crime address, the member for Centerville declared, I quote, how can it be that people accused of one horrific crime are freed to commit more crime? This violates common sense and it violates common decency. We must move heaven and earth to get persons accused of murder tried within 12 months, preventing their release on bail, end quote. Apparently, his government has not been able to move themselves, much less heaven or earth. The member for Centerville stated once again in 2011, we will bring back the Swift Justice Program, stronger than ever, to coordinate police, prosecutors, prison administration.
Point of order. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker,
The point of order.
the point of order, the member for Long Island has said that we have, in essence, failed to bring the time for trials of serious murders, but serious crimes like murder down to 12 months. There has been one instance where a trial has occurred within 12 months. We have this year succeeded in ensuring that there are 10 criminal trials going at the same time. We are in the midst of a backlog. We have brought matters forward. Matters are now proceeding on the basis that they can be heard within a reasonable time. This year, the numbers for the grant of bail by the Supreme Court are radically down. In fact, in January, no bail was granted whatsoever. So that to ascribe a description to what is happening now that the member has done is not a fair assessment of the facts. In fact, there's no factual basis to support an opinion if it is an opinion that is being expressed.
Thank you, honorable member.
In fact, in the other place, the Attorney General was savaged by the leader of the opposition in the Senate for her boast. She produced the statistics. Those statistics have been published and are widely known. So I am surprised that the member for Long Island would maintain that argument at this point. Now, I have no, she can
Thank you,
do the politics.
You're good. Thank you, honorable member. Member for Long
Mr.
Island.
Speaker, we are speaking to the norm, not the exception. And until it becomes the norm, this is what was stated by the member for Centerville during his time as opposition leader, and I stand by that. One case, Mr. Speaker, that is an exception. They said this was going to be the norm, swift justice. I stand by what I have to say. And so clearly, Mr. Speaker, I imagine that in time, should it continue that trend, we will see the statistics that substantiate what the member for South Eleuthera is alluding to. But clearly, this government is not catching, trying, and punishing criminals nearly as swiftly as the Prime Minister forecasted when he was the PLP opposition leader. The member for Centerville also said in 2011, too many criminals have no respect for our justice system. We need to remove their sense of impunity, increase the likelihood they will not just be arrested, but prosecuted, not just prosecuted, but sentenced, not just sentenced, but sentenced harshly. We must be clear. Violence will be punished and justice will be swift. Mr. Speaker, justice in the norm has not been swift. And so the member for Centerville also said then that we must have additional criminal trial courts for too many victims and their families. Justice delayed is justice denied. Yes, we do have 10, and you know that you met those 10 in progress when you took office in May. Mr. Speaker, those are
the chair. Members, there's a member on the floor. There's a member on the floor. There's a member on the floor.
Point of order.
The chair recognized the member for South.
What has just been said is demonstrably false from a review of the records of demonstrably false and monstrously false based on the records of proceedings in this place. At our second budget debate, statistics and data was produced which showed that at the rate of hearing of trials in the Supreme Court, given the complement of the Supreme Court at that time, the backlog could not be reduced. As a consequence of that analysis, the Right Honorable Member for Centerville immediately stated in this House that resources would be deployed for the renovation of the old Magistrates Court complex in Bank Lane and the setting up of court facilities to enable courts, additional criminal courts, to be made available to the Supreme Court so that 10 criminal courts could be operational on a daily basis during the week. We spent the better part of a year and a half spending upwards of $3 million to have the renovation complete. We passed legislation in this House to increase the complement of judges on the Supreme Court so as to enable the appointment of 10 criminal judges without disrupting the civil side. This we did. And the member for Long Island was present in this House, and I believe that she participated in the debate. So that for her to stand here and to assert that we met 10 criminal courts going at the same time.
I did not say that.
That is what you said.
Very well. Understood. You'll be recognized. The member takes issue with that, but you make your point.
Even if she is saying that we met in place plans for that to happen, that is not true. Because, and that is demonstrably not true, because the first budget that we presented was completely prepared by the civil servants that we met in place, and we had, on winning, the invidious position of having to actually present their budget as our own. No provision was made in that budget for additional judges. Now, if plans were afoot prior to the election for those judges to be in place, one would have expected in the line item relating to the judiciary and to the number of judges, that there would have been an increase in the number of judges. And that must have been the place, that must have been the position.
Very well.
If you're talking about planning. But you can't say we were planning it and no financial provision was being made for the hiring of the judges and the staff associated with additional courts. And you will have seen from the last budget the huge increase in the allocation of monies for the increased number of judges in the Supreme Court, not only for the judges, but for the staff associated with those judges and the facilities associated with running courts.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Clear. Member for Long Island?
Mr. Speaker, let me bring clarity to that long-winded explanation with regards to what South Eleuthera had to say. I would like to say clearly, the member for Centerville from his seat said there are now 10 courts. And I, in response, said, yes, we had started those. Mr. Speaker, while I accept what he has said about judges and all of the other things, the Ansbacher building here, Mr. Speaker, which is an example of the work they met under construction when they took office, is what I was referring to. But let me say, let me bring clarity. They had stopped it, Mr. Speaker, and then continued, and the work that was being continued at the South Street building. So I was speaking to courts, not to judges. And if I'm wrong, Mr. Speaker, I will accept that. But I wasn't speaking anything about remuneration of judges, and I don't know what South Eleuthera was going on, because obviously, just as he tabled the same bill several times this morning.
Member, that's not necessary. That's not necessary at all. Uncalled for.
But Mr. Speaker, I was speaking about courts, and he gave us a whole diatribe on judges.
Very well.
We weren't speaking about that.
Very well, member. You continue, Honourable Member.
Stenographers too. Tell them they need stenographers.
Members.
And so, Mr. Speaker,
that's why you need stenographers.
The government was not swift in fulfilling its promise. It wasn't until the carnage in Fox Hill at the end of 2013 that the government tried to speed up the refurbishment and the construction of new courts already begun by the F&M. And that is what I'm saying. The delay in the construction of new courts stands in direct contradiction to much of the talk of swift justice. The PLP is swift to make rash promises, but slow to act. Mr. Speaker, the member for Centerville said in the run-up to the 2012 election, the PLP has big ideas about what can be accomplished in the Bahamas, about what kind of nation we can be in the 21st century, in this new millennium. What the PLP had and still have, in my opinion, is plenty big talk, but no big action. This House should remember this big talk from the leader of the PLP. Remember this, I quote, "We intend to double our investment in education over the next 5 years." What a cruel joke. This big talk was another empty promise, the sort of delusion that is today on full display by none other than the leader. There is even more big talk, Mr. Speaker, and this is what he said. Do you know that research has shown that at-risk children who don't participate in quality preschool programs are 5 times more likely to be criminals at the age of 27 than children who did have a good quality program early in their lives? Early education works, and it deserves our funding and support. So I ask the question, what has become of this grand promise on early childhood education? It remains what it was at the beginning, a grand but insincere promise. Then there was this big promise and big talk by the leader who said, and I quote, "We are proposing a new mentorship program called 50 Bahamians. 50 of the most successful Bahamians from the toughest neighborhoods will be paired with at-risk youth." What is the status of this program? What is the status of this promise? The PLP also promised in its charter
Member for Bain and Grandstand.
The promise is being actualized, Mr. Speaker. That's what the Give Every Child a Father program is a part of.
Very well. Member for Long Island.
What is the name of the program?
Member for Bain and Grandstand.
The name of the program is Give Every Child a Father. And we are seeking, and we not only are we seeking, we have been able to identify a number of fathers who have taken on the task of mentoring underprivileged children, deprived children, and so forth. And we are building the program very carefully because the people that we identify as mentors have to pass a test of honesty and forthrightness, etc., etc.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member
Thank
for
you
Long
very
Island.
much. So this was in their manifesto called the 50 Bahamians. So I imagine the name has changed, but I accept that. I accept that.
It doesn't the name has changed. The program will be in several parts. This particular part is about boys and men.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member
Mr.
for Long
Speaker,
Island.
I'm only quoting from this particular blueprint, this roadmap, which was given to the Bahamian people, and it spoke of those particular things. So, Mr. Speaker,
Opening of the Sister Annie Thompson preschool on the 7th of
paradigm
May.
in preschool.
New, just as has happened with the Our Lady School, the Marjorie Davis Institute, Mr. Speaker, they need to know they need to take note of what is actually going on.
Mr. Speaker, the Marjorie Davis Institute, of which the member just spoke to, is a special needs school. It is not a preschool. And I'm going to go back to what the member for Centerville then said. It is,
Members,
Mr. Speaker,
okay.
today,
Members?
as of today, there was no preschool program. And Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking of the facts today. And so I will not be deterred from what I say. Also, Mr. Speaker, you know they say, Mr. Speaker,
you are tying it into the bills.
when the shoe is squeezing your toes, you get a lot of crying. I can't even speak over the din that's coming from the side opposite. And so, Mr. Speaker, the PLP also promised in its charter, and I quote, the PLP will introduce a formal system of restorative justice where in appropriate cases, through community policing and in conjunction with urban renewal program, compensation and restoration may be used as an effective means of resolving minor crimes with the concurrence of the complainant. What has happened to these big ideas and big promises of restorative justice initiative, Mr. Speaker? And so I say, Mr. Speaker, toward the end of his 2011 crime address, the then leader, now Prime Minister, member for, Right Honorable Member for Centerville, declared that first we have to get crime right, and nothing matters more. But you know, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about crime and the rule of law, we have to question whether or not this particular administration is serious. Because you know, Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, the Right Honorable Member for Centerville came in here and made an intervention saying that he had been invited by the member for Maical to relieve him of his duties as it related to local government. And Mr. Speaker, we must be seen to be upholding the rule of law. This past weekend, Mr. Speaker, in Exuma, there was none other than the Honorable V. Alfred Gray officiating at the Exuma Regatta. And so, Mr. Speaker, that comes under local government. That comes under local government. And so, Mr. Speaker, regattas were always touted, and
there's a member on the floor. The chair recognizes member for Bain and Grandstand.
Speaker, the regatta is not a part of the local government portfolio.
Regattas, they apologize.
She has to educate herself. about these matters before she speaks
Just in
about
the
them.
Look at the
Honourable member.
been to my constituency on 2 occasions and said he was there as the local government minister for regattas. And he then also went on to state that he gave X amount of funding to the regatta for Long Island. And so it has been held that local government was, regattas were under local government. And so, Mr. Speaker, we need clarity on that.
Member for
You don't know. You come
member for Bain and Grandstown.
You need clarity.
Mr. Speaker.
Members,
For members of the public, the regatta is not a part of the local government portfolio. And I am sure Mr. Gray never said he's a local government
member for Michael.
A member for regattas. That doesn't even sound right, Mr. Speaker. Huh? He's a local government member for regattas.
But it doesn't matter.
Member,
That's
member, member.
On Saturday, he spoke as the
Member.
minister responsible for regatta. Now, what more you want?
All right.
That was his responsibility. Doesn't matter what he said.
Members,
They
we've
are
dealt,
ridiculing
we've
me
dealt with
because
that.
I can tell
We've dealt with it.
Correct yourself, you're wrong.
Members, members, members,
Correct yourself.
members,
Portfolio
members. Yeah, we've dealt with that. Member, the chair would prefer you to move on.
Mr. Speaker, I just want you to know what that member said in my
Very well.
constituency.
Yeah,
Okay?
move on,
I'm
Honourable.
saying that it's local government. Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, we're talking about evidence and law reform. I sound the call again. We still await legislation for the National Intelligence Agency. We're talking about rule and law and order. Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat today, I would like to state that many have witnessed the numerous generators that have been brought in here for some event that this government has planned. And Mr. Speaker, it is a crying shame that those amount of generators that we see lined off on Arawak for whatever event they are for, are being brought in here for the use of visitors when Bahamians are catching eternal hell in losing their hard-earned money in spoiled goods, in lost business days. And Mr. Speaker, that money for those generators could have been used to invest in BEC to keep the lights on. It was a sad day yesterday, Mr. Speaker, to know that they celebrated, we as a country celebrated Black Tuesday in the dark. It was indeed a Black Tuesday. Mr. Speaker, Long Island thanks you.
And thank you, Honourable Member. Not surprising, the member for Tall Pines directly behind you stands.
Mr. Speaker.
Member for Tall Pines, your purpose for standing.
Speaker, the generators on Arawak has absolutely anything to do with BEC.
That's my point.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, Mr. Speaker, the 40 megawatts of generators that we rented from Agreco, Mr. Speaker, many of them are now in Freeport and will be in Nassau on Monday. And next week, we expect most of them, Mr. Speaker. Those generators that's on Arawak are so insignificant. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, all of the generators on Arawak could not light the sports stadium for one night. They are so insignificant. They have no bearing on any electrical apparatus in New Providence except to provide standby generation for what they're doing on Arawak. One could have nothing to do with the next.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Honourable Member. As many.
No.
The member for South and Central is standing to wrap up. The chair recognizes Honourable Member for Kalani.
Thank you very much. The ones who were laid off and 32 hired have been in the street. Huh? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Check it out. Mr. Speaker, as leader of Her Majesty's opposition,
Members,
I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, to see some evidence of activity coming out of the Law Reform and Revision Commission and the Attorney General's office, especially the bill to amend the Evidence Act. I say especially, Mr. Speaker, because of the current unacceptable level of crime in this country and the terrible rate of prosecution. All of us, Mr. Speaker, all of us on both sides of the parliamentary divide need to unite to increase the scheduling of prosecution and the success rate, given the ever-increasing number of persons whose lives are adversely affected by criminal activity.
Yeah, that's what caused it.
Mr. Speaker, of even greater concern, the lag in prosecution seems to grow each year and is now perverting the course of justice. Mr. Speaker, in fact, the criminals feel that it's quite safe to engage in criminal activity because of the delay in court cases and delay in prosecution. And, Mr. Speaker, they feel that regardless to what occur, they're in a position to receive bail. And in some instances, they can call upon their friends or politicians who may offer some form of assistance, as we've seen just recently, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, to see that Evidence Amendment Bill attempts to modernize the giving of evidence by making use of technology. But I want to refer back to 2012. As you know, the FNM had introduced video conferencing or video link as evidence, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I see the potential of electronic reporting in closing the gap on two perennial problems.
You're lying.
One of them has been getting visitors who have been victims of crime in the Bahamas to return to give evidence. No doubt from fear of further victimization. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, evidence by electronic communication can hopefully assist in increasing the protection of witnesses in criminal trials. I believe that many useful testimonies that can serve the progress of justice never reach the courts because many potential witnesses are afraid of endangering their lives by coming forward. That said, Mr. Speaker, I would like to point out that with regard to our laws, we missed the boat in designing the instruments of Bahamas independence. Maybe from the fatigue of the long fight to majority rule and self-determination, we didn't have the energy left to make the distinction between reform and revision. And in the structuring of the new Bahamian national identity, especially in relation to our laws and pursuit of justice. Let me draw a picture here, Mr. Speaker. Let's say that you have sealed a deal to buy a house. The first thing you do is start repairs and buying furniture, buying stove, refrigerators, but you fail to make sure that your attorney has done proper due diligence, proper title search, and you neglect to make certain that you have good title for your property. Too many Bahamians have suffered because of this form of keeping the bath water and throwing out the baby. Mr. Speaker, we need proper land registry. When it comes to updating our laws,
I see plenty evidence that we are doing the same thing nationally. Our ship of state is missing the harbor of true independence 42 years after July 10th, 73. Our compass is not reading true because we seem not to understand the difference between reform and revision. And we don't seem to understand how vital laws are to achieving a more orderly society and national and personal well-being. Mr. Speaker, our laws must be enforced. We cannot have one set of laws for politicians or parliamentarians and another set for those in the inner city or elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, it's time for us to see a complete paradigm shift within our Bahamas, where our laws are completely enforced and accepted. 40 years is a long enough rest period. We have to ensure that the law renew mechanisms keeps ahead or abreast of a desirable quality of social and economic development. Mr. Speaker, that is not happening today. We are still cutting much of the cloth of Bahamian justice by the 17th English tailoring. We still have too many out-of-date British laws on our books that are not serving the cause of national sovereignty and progress, especially, Mr. Speaker, in addressing basic human rights and freedom. In this debate on laws, we must pay more attention and respect to the foundation of Bahamian law. That is the Bahamian Constitution. Why is it that women and men in a certain category are still second-class citizens? What happened, Mr. Speaker, to the promised referendum on citizenship? Is this government hoping that with enough foot shuffling and finger pointing, the public will forget it? Mr. Speaker, we must stop the discrimination against women. We must also stop, Mr. Speaker, the discrimination against our young people. When we continuously have within the public sector promotion based on seniority, is that not overt discrimination on our young people? And then we ask the question, why do we suffer brain drain? Why would an individual want to come within the public sector when promotion is based on seniority and they know that they cannot be promoted based on merit? We must stop the overt discrimination, not only upon the females and our young, Mr. Speaker, but we must stop the discrimination, the overt discrimination within our public sector and allow our young people to advance. We can seem to push out laws on reforming and financial service sector, Mr. Speaker, and other economic matters pretty quickly, although it takes gooseying from the powerful international community or the appearance of paying off party support.
Not sure that's parliamentary.
But what about the laws, Mr. Speaker?
Member for Kalani.
What about the laws?
Member for Kalani.
Long Island.
Members. Members. Members.
You know what that is. It's a good old Bahamian word. You know what that is.
Member,
Speaker.
no, member for Kalani.
Some know better than others.
Members. Member for Kalani. The word you use, goosey. That I'm not sure we understand.
Agitation, Mr. Speaker.
Very well.
Speaker.
In the Bahamian vernacular.
Mr. Speaker, I am sure every Bahamian.
Use it in a sentence.
Let me use it in a sentence.
Mr. Speaker, I can go see you.
Let me use it in a sentence.
No.
Use it in a sentence.
After we come out here, I'll explain it. I can go see you. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. David. Y'all got the point. You got the point. Mr. Speaker.
You get the point?
Mr. Speaker, 42 years past the celebration of independence.
You get the point.
Mr. Speaker.
You got the point in the goose?
Y'all got the point. Mr. Speaker, what about the laws that respond to social considerations and the quality of life on the whole? Where is the deep and urgent concern for the quality of life of the Bahamian people? Mr. Speaker, we only need to look in the Marathon constituency and witness the quality of life Bahamians changing. Mr. Speaker, this government had sat on the information for in excess of a year, and the Minister of Health said he had no comment. But when they've gotten everything together, then he will speak. After allowing 1+ years of silence, Mr. Speaker. 42 years past the celebration of independence. We need to smarten up and get legislation and justice on a sure footing. To start with, lawmakers have to understand the difference between reform and revision. In an essay that Queen's Counsel Thomas Evans put on the internet, Mr. Speaker, you can find a valuable definition. Evans proposed that law reform would involve some fundamental restructuring or complete replacement of existing laws with new and improved ones. Whereas revision does not involve any fundamental change. This government, Mr. Speaker, has to drink some courage juice and spend more time and money on law reform than on law revision. They must spend more time, Mr. Speaker, on law reform than on law revision.
One takes the other.
We have to stop paddling along the shore to make things look good to the local and international public and get into the deep waters of real, purposeful, and needful legislative change. It is urgent, Mr. Speaker, to redefine rape and domestic abuse. These are still subjects that are either fodder for ridicule or dismissal. Too many women and men, Mr. Speaker, but mostly women, suffer and even lose their lives because of our country's archaic laws that still do not recognize marital rape and domestic abuse as real crime. Too many legislators still secretly see rape as slap and tickle and not real crime, especially if you're dealing with an adult who was not a virgin at the time of the assault. Reports, Mr. Speaker, of the ridicule to which defense attorneys subject rape victims make rape a hugely unreported crime. It is urgent, Mr. Speaker, to put more teeth in our child protection laws, especially as to truancy, child custody and causing harm to children or worse, their death. The Law Reform and Revision Commission must hasten examination of laws regarding transparency and accountability on the part of public servants and especially members of government. This country's laws, Mr. Speaker, must carve in steel and separation between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Recent developments tell us that the hour for this has not only come, but is long past. If ever there was a concept fundamental to democracy, it is this. So is transparency and accountability in public affairs and among public servants. Without adherence to such values, there can be no independence or true democracy. And yet, two people who were once members of cabinet or executive, and one who still is, feel safe in dismissing them. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, as far as legislation is concerned, this country still has a lot more growing up to do. Mr. Speaker, I offer a few suggestions. Law reform must proceed from the same motivation as all law, to protect life and enhance the quality of life and society in general. It is unfortunate of legislators who think that they have to do with punishment only. The ministries, departments, and agencies which have responsibility in this regard must be adequately anchored by adequate funding, supply, and not just adequately skilled personnel. They must feel free to act without the pressure of personal agendas or partisan politics. For greatest benefit, the Law Reform Commission needs to reflect a wider range of expertise and channels for transparent consultation. Right now, Mr. Speaker, the legislation backing the formation of the Commission calls for the appointment of, and I quote, one or more persons appointed by the Governor General. Such persons shall be qualified by appointment, by holding off, or by having held judicial office, or by experience as a legal practitioner or as a teacher of law in the university. Of course, strength in legal knowledge and experience is paramount. But if we are engaged in the protection and betterment of society, shouldn't we include among the number of commissioners a sociologist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist? I am also concerned that the process of law reform should be inclusive and accessible. While members of the general public may not possess the expertise to define legal concepts, their opinions can help commissioners to understand the mechanisms of Bahamian society. Public commentary can help commissioners to understand the thinking that provides a foundation for some of the behavior that is bringing increasing chaos to our communities. If this is sufficiently understood, it could help in the design of legislation. Laws must not just be responsive, but proactive as well. Is there a method by which members of the public can contact the Commission with suggestions or comment? How can we better educate the public about human rights and the relevance of Commission's deliberations to protecting and enhancing those rights? Will the annual updates of Commission to be published in forms that men and women on the street can understand without a college degree? This is democracy. Above all, Mr. Speaker, legislation in all its aspects must be blessed and objectivity. There should be a well-defined process for examining and conducting triage of existing laws, to set up a timetable for the repeal and elimination of all obsolete and archaic laws and laws which are temporary in nature. With a deep concern for objectivity in the vital process of law reform and revision, I ask whether there is sufficient legislative distance between the relevant minister, party politics, and the commission. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, there is every indication in recent developments with regard to law making and governance to suggest that this country and its leaders need to review the principles of democracy and hasten to repair the breaches of those principles made recently by persons who feel that such principles are no longer necessary. If not, we can kiss goodbye to democracy. History has shown that once out of the barn, the horse can seldom be recovered in good health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, for the wrap-up, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for South and Central Eleuthera. The member yields. The Chair recognizes member for Bain and Grandstand.
Speaker, I move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Very well. It's moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The business of this House will suspend until 3 p.m. sharp this afternoon.
All right.
We're tuning into the Parliamentary Channel 40. You're just hearing debate on the Evidence Amendment Bill 2015 and also amendments to the Law and Reform Amendment Bill. Now, the Law and Reform Amendment Bill is just deleting some wording from that piece of legislation which will allow the commissioner to remain on for more than a 5-year term. Now, according to the Minister of State for Legal Affairs, Damian Gomez, he said this was important to attract more persons into that profession or to get them to stay because persons would not want to take up that position because of the restrictions on tenure. And then there's the Evidence Amendment Bill where this will allow evidence by experts to be given during criminal court proceedings by way of video link. Certainly, it is an advancement of that piece of legislation to shore up the judicial system and is also a part of the government's Swift Justice Initiative. Now, we heard contributions from a number of members of Parliament today on these two bills. We heard from the Minister of State for Legal Affairs, Damian Gomez. There was also contributions from the Minister of State for Works, the Honorable Arnold Forbes. We also heard some comments from the opposition, Ms. Loretta Butler-Turner, MP for Long Island, the leader of the party, Dr. Hubert Minnis. Now we're just waiting for a number of interviews, a number of things coming out of the House of Assembly during the morning session. The Fox Hill MP, who's also responsible for immigration, he gave an update of the immigration situation here in the Bahamas, detailing the number of illegals that they have at the detention center. I believe it's more than 130 persons are there waiting for repatriation. The majority of them made up of Cubans and Haitians, but we have joining us with us this morning outside of the House of Assembly by the Senate is the MP for East Grand Bahama, Mr. Peter Turnquest, joining us live. You gave your contributions to the bill this morning. Just tell us, you had some recommendations really for this bill. Just explain to us what they were.
Well, I think overall we support the bill. It is imperative that we use whatever technologies that are available to assist in the effective and efficient course of justice. And so to the extent that this allows us to be able to interview witnesses and witnesses to give evidence through electronic means. It's certainly a helpful piece of legislation, and so we have no issues with respect to that. Basically, what I was talking about was using this same kind of technology to help in the fight against crime. Whether it is with respect to integrating all of the various government agencies through electronic means, having that information available to police officers at their fingertips in their police cruisers, whether it is enhancing the identification data that is contained on our driver's license, whether it includes setting up effective interventions in these hotspot areas with police saturation patrols, as well as mobile police stations that are there fixed, whether it is with setting up gang intervention programs with professionals, not necessarily with laymen. We have plenty of churches and other social organizations that can certainly help the process, but we need some effective professional help, people who are experts in these areas, to figure out how we can resolve some of these violent gang issues that we have that results in these revenge killings and crime. And so I think, I was trying to present a sort of holistic approach to this whole issue that we have, because there's no one answer. It is going to be a combination of solutions, and it's going to take all of us getting involved in the process to help quell what's happening today.
Okay, thank you so much. Always willing to give us a quick interview. We also have joined with us the Minister of State for Legal Affairs, Mr. Damian Gomez. Now, Mr. Gomez, crime really dominated the discussions today during the debate on these two bills. There were some recommendations coming from the side opposite, but there are also some issues that they took with crime in the country right now, especially in relation to intimidation of witnesses, especially when we look at what is happening with gang violence, and also bail. And you made some comments about bail not being given to persons in the month of January. Can you update us on that?
Well, as you know, I'm wrapping up this afternoon, and I intend to deal with those questions in my contribution. We are satisfied at the Office of the Attorney General that every effort is being made to ensure that trials are completed in as efficient and speedy manner as is possible. We have devoted, as a government, enormous resources to ensure that the Supreme Court has the wherewithal to do what it needs to do to have 10 continuous trials going during the work week. That is, by and large, being achieved. The courts are operational, and they are effective. You only need to read the newspapers to see that the judges are sitting and the matters are being churned out. The consequence for persons who are accused of serious crime is that bail is no longer as readily available as it used to be. That is the important point which needs to be appreciated by the public. In time, as the court demonstrates its effectiveness and efficiency, there will be an impact on criminal activity, it is hoped.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Minister of State for Legal Affairs joining us live. As you heard, he's prepared to give a wrap-up of these two pieces of legislation at the 3 o'clock hour when the House of Assembly resumes. Also coming out of the House of Assembly today, the Speaker of the House, the Honorable Dr. Kendo Major, he gave an update on the Public Accounts Committee, and he says he's prepared to give a ruling on that matter involving urban renewal at a later date. We'll, of course, keep you updated on all the proceedings here at the House of Assembly, but you can join us again at 3 p.m. where wrap-up is expected of the Evidence Amendment Bill and the Law and Reform Amendment Bill. For the House of Assembly, I'm Janae Noel Ferguson, ZNS Network News.